The last time I broadcast to you was on the 3rd of September. And it is to tell you that we were at war with Germany. The catastrophe which I had striven so hard to prevent had come upon us, thanks to Hitler's unbridled ambition. And there was nothing left for us to do but to set our teeth and with our friends and allies to put a stop to this policy of domination which had so long disturbed the peace of Europe. I had always hoped that it would never fall to my lot to have to make that decision. But when the time came, I did not and I could not hesitate to take it. For I knew that the liberties of all free peoples, including our own, were at stake. And today, after just 12 weeks of war, I am speaking to you again, happily with health and strength unimpaired, and with complete confidence in our ultimate victory. Of one thing you can be sure. We shall not follow the German example of either concealing our own losses from you or of inventing enemy losses which do not exist. We told you of the loss of the Courageous and the Royal Oak, and you have just heard of the sinking of the Royal Finlay. None of these losses affects our overwhelming naval superiority, but we shall tell you frankly what is happening, even when the truth is unpleasant. And we shall never refrain from publishing news except when it would be helpful to the enemy to have it. Up to the present, the war has been carried on in a way very different from what we expected. We need not attribute the reluctance of the Germans to begin a great land offensive or to attempt a series of mass attacks from the air upon this country to their humanity. We have had plenty of evidence that no considerations of humanity deter them from any form of warfare that they think will bring them some advantage. They must, therefore, have come to the conclusion that at present they would lose more than they would gain by such attacks. And they have preferred to use methods which they think can be employed without serious loss to themselves. The latest of these methods, as you all know, is the sowing of a new kind of mine indiscriminately in our home waters. It matters nothing to the German government that what they are doing is contrary to international agreements to which they have subscribed. It matters nothing to them that they are daily blowing up neutral ships as well as British, and thereby drowning or mutilating citizens of countries with which they are not at war. They hope, by these barbarous weapons, to cut off our supplies from overseas and so squeeze or starve us into submission. You need have no fear that this attempt will succeed. Already we know the secrets of the magnetic mine, and we shall soon master it as we've already mastered the U-boat. And in the meantime, despite some losses, our convoys are still moving steadily in and out of our ports, and they will continue to do so, thanks to the courage and skill of the men in our merchant navy and in the warships which escort them. It may be that some of you who are listening to me are yourselves serving at sea in His Majesty's ships or in the vessels which maintain our supplies from overseas. I would like you to know that we are constantly thinking of you and of the perils of storms and of a ruthless enemy that you are facing day and night. Upon you has hitherto fallen the brunt of the war, and we cannot be sufficiently grateful to you for the cool and steadfast courage with which you have carried on our task. We do not forget that the safety of these islands depends on the untiring watchfulness of our seamen, as it has done ever since the days of Queen Elizabeth. Others of my listeners may be serving in the army, some in distant garrisons overseas, some in France, some again keeping perpetual vigil over their guns on the home front. For you, the time for conflict has not yet arrived, but we know that you are cheerfully enduring the monotony and discomforts that inevitably attend the routine of preparation, and that when the day of battle comes, you will be ready to meet it, as your fathers were before you. And as for you who are serving in the Air Force, our youngest fighting service, you too have an important part to play in the defense of the homeland, as well as in the defeat of the enemy's forces. We have watched with pride and admiration your gallant exploits in those aerial combats in which you have already taken part. We feel confident that you will be more than equal to any demands that may be made upon you. I do not forget that I have tonight a still wider audience, and that my voice will travel to all the peoples of the British Empire. I wish that I could speak to each and thank them for their support, so freely and so swiftly given. We entered the war to defend freedom and to establish peace. Those are the two vital principles of our empire, and the empire's unity today gives us the moral as well as the material strength to win them. And now I want to speak to those among you who are listening to me from your homes in the towns and villages of Great Britain. Many of you are engaged on one form or another of national service, often at great sacrifice to yourselves. Others are serving your country no less usefully on the land, in mines and factories, in hospitals, in offices, in your own homes, and in numberless other ways. Whatever your work may be, I know well that in greater or less degree the war has interrupted and affected your daily life. Some of you are already mourning the loss of those who were dearest to you. For such grief as yours, no words of mine could pretend to afford consolation. I would only say this, that I know no cause more worthy of the supreme sacrifice than that for which those lives have been given. We must be thankful that so far the war has brought no such casualty lists as those which overshadowed the early months of the war of 1914. But there must be few to whom it has not meant anxiety or disturbance of mind, discomfort, material loss, or even severe hardship. Husbands and wives have been separated from one another or from their children. Home arrangements have been upset by having to village strangers or children accustomed to different ways of living. Businesses have been dislocated. Hard-done practices have had to be abandoned. Buildings have been commandeered at short notice and at great inconvenience to their owners and occupants. Heavy taxation has cut into incomes and imposed severe restriction upon expenditure. Then again, there are the daily irritating inconveniences of restrictions of various kinds, not forgetting the blackout and the difficulty and discomfort of traveling. Most of these hardships and inconveniences have been brought about by the necessity of providing against attacks from the air. Some of them may seem now to have been unnecessary, since the air raids have not taken place. But if they had come, as everyone expected, and had found us unprepared, you would have rightly blamed the government for its neglect. Even now, we cannot assume that the Germans will not change their tactics and make a sudden attack from the air upon this country. We must not, therefore, rashly dispense with our safeguards, but we are constantly revising the existing restrictions, and we shall certainly relax them whenever we feel that we can do so without undue risk to the public safety. I do not think I need say more about restrictions which are imposed only in the general interest, and which I am sure will be cheerfully borne if they help to bring us victory. I said a little while ago that this was a different kind of war from what we expected. Perhaps you may sometimes wonder why we ourselves are not attacking the enemy with more vigor. Well, I would remind you that the art of war consists in bringing the greatest possible force to bear at the right place and at the right time. In our case, the place and time will be decided by those who are responsible for the strategy of the Allies. But in the meanwhile, we are not losing anything by delay. But time is on our side. Every week that passes by intensifies the pressure upon Germany of the Allies' blockade, which is slowly but surely depriving her of those materials which are essential to the successful prosecution of a modern war, and which she cannot produce within her own borders. How different is the position of the Allies, who have at their disposal, within the empire or elsewhere, unlimited resources in men and material. Such advantages they are bound to win in the end. And the only question is how long it will take them to achieve their purpose. That brings me to the last point I want to make. What is the purpose for which we are today standing side by side with our French and Polish allies? The question has been answered over and over again by myself, by Monsieur Delalier, by Lord Halifax, and other members of the government. One would think that there could be no doubt about it. But there are still questioners who feel that we have not yet sufficiently defined our aim. In my own mind, I make a distinction between war aims and peace aims. Our war aim can be stated very shortly. It is to defeat our enemy. And by that I do not merely mean the defeat of the enemy's military forces. I mean the defeat of that aggressive, bullying mentality which seeks continually to dominate other peoples by force, which finds a brutal satisfaction in the persecution and torture of inoffensive citizens, and in the name of the interests of the state, justifies the repudiation of its own pledged word whenever it finds it convenient. If the German people can be convinced that that spirit is as bad for themselves as for the rest of the world, they will abandon it. If we can secure that they do abandon it without bloodshed, so much the better. But abandoned it must be. That is our war aim. And we shall persevere in this struggle until we have attained it. When we come to peace aims, we are dealing with something to be achieved in conditions we cannot at present foresee. Our definition of them can therefore only be in the most general terms, but there can be no harm in declaring the broad principles on which we should desire to found them. Our desire, then, when we've achieved our war aim, would be to establish a new Europe. Not new in the sense of tearing up all the old frontier posts and redrawing the map according to the ideas of the victors, but a Europe with a new spirit, in which the nations which inhabit it will approach their difficulties with goodwill and mutual tolerance. In such a Europe, fear of aggression would have ceased to exist, and such adjustments of boundaries as would be necessary would be thrashed out between neighbors, sitting on equal terms round a table, with the help of disinterested third parties, if it were so desired. In such a Europe, it would be recognized that there can be no lasting peace unless there is a full and constant flow of trade between the nations concerned. For only by increased interchange of goods and services can the standard of living be improved. In such a Europe, each country would have the unfettered right to choose its own form of internal government, so long as that government did not pursue an external policy injurious to its neighbors. Lastly, in such a Europe, armaments would gradually be dropped as a useless expense, except in so far as they were needed for the preservation of internal law and order. It is obvious that the establishment of this utopian Europe, which I have briefly sketched out, could not be the work of weeks or even months. It would be a continuous process, stretching over many years. Indeed, it would be impossible to set a time limit upon it, for conditions never cease to change, and corresponding adjustments would be required if friction is to be avoided. Consequently, you would need some machinery capable of conducting and guiding the development of the new Europe in the right direction. I do not think it necessary, nor indeed is it possible, to specify at this stage the kind of machinery which should be established for this purpose. I merely express the opinion that something of the sort would have to be provided, and I would add my hope that a Germany animated by a new spirit might be among the nations which would take part in its operations. There, then, for the present, I leave the peace aims. And once more, I would remind you that before we can begin to translate them into action, we have got first to achieve our war aim and win the war. In that purpose, members of the British Commonwealth are united as they never have been before in all our history. Let us then gird up our loins, confident in our own tenacity and resolute in our determination. Let us keep clear before our eyes the necessity that this reign of terror instituted under the present German government should come to an end, in order that we may build a new and better Europe. We know that in this great struggle we are fighting for the right and against the wrong. Let us then go forward with God's blessing on our arms, and we shall prevail.